In our opening session for this 2014 annual meeting, we heard a letter read to us by Pope Francis, a leader who has captured the attention of the world. He called us here to go deeper, to reshape the world. He said something quite striking. He said, "I ask you to ensure that humanity is served by wealth and not ruled by it." So to that deeper reflection in this closing session, I believe for many of us here at Davos, there was a moment, a remark at a session, an interactive discussion, a meal with a friend, a conversation, a walk in the snow, that made us think and feel some things we don't normally back in our day-to-day environment. Could have been an insight, a framework, a new angle, a new way of seeing something or feeling something that struck us more deeply and wasn't just more talk, but went to the heart of things. It made an impact on us. Often these insightful moments are about our values, or they challenge our values and bring us back to that moral compass that we have or would like to have, or maybe feel like we once had, but no longer are so sure. I often get pulled aside for conversations. It's a clergy deficit here. In a corner over a cup of coffee about deep ethical concerns that arise from those moments of reflection. Business and other leaders sometimes mention their own religious background or their moral sensibilities or their moral qualms, their qualms about something they're doing or not doing, or something they feel uncomfortable with. I've come to think of these personal conversations as my Davos confessionals. This year we've had some morning sessions on the dilemmas of ethics and values, and even taken time for meditation, sometimes called mindfulness. Professor Klaus Schwab says that leaders must have soul to guide values. These morning reflections were a pause at the beginning of the day to help find our way back to that moral compass. I suppose you could call these morning pauses Davos devotionals. They revealed to me some of the obstacles that are in the way of Davos participants implementing their values back where they live and work. I often hear people tell me that something really inspired them. Then I ask, how can you implement that back home? And they often say, too often say, I can't do that. I don't know how to do that. That's what has to change. And this closing session is really about that. It's called A Leap of Faith, a good name for spoken word and music that goes to the heart. It's well described, I think, as a bold leap that often must be taken to carry out the mission statement to improve the state of the world. We should listen to mission statements. The transformation of the world that so many of us long for requires a changing of ethics and values and frameworks, most of all, our decisions. And that will not happen without taking risks, a true leap of faith. Some of the values that we talked about in these morning sessions are crucial now, composed by some of us in a new social covenant. We name them as human dignity, the common good, and stewardship. How do we treat all the people who are impacted by our institutions, directly or indirectly, as human beings and not merely as commodities? How can our supply chains become value chains? Is our primary metric our bubble, our executive team, our company only, or our shareholders? Or do we measure our success by the common good? Is that now part of our bottom line? What happens when the invisible hand of the market lets go of the common good? That's a deep question for us. How does the ethic of stewardship care for both our planet and our posterity compared to the short-termism of market fundamentalism? How do we not just track quarterly profit and losses, but move toward that ethic of indigenous people who say we should evaluate decisions today by their impact on the seventh generation out? This year, as we close, I want to call all of us to bold action on behalf of our better instincts that we were reminded of here. We need leadership where it matters most, where it is most difficult, and where it will probably cost us some things. I'm calling this at the end our Davos call to measure ourselves in different ways. Pope Francis asked us in that letter to keep in mind those who are the most excluded from the global economy. And we have here spoken about the multitudes of those who are still socially excluded. But we here are perhaps the most included people in the world in that global economy. We are a group of the most included. So will the most included reach out to the most excluded in this year? All our prophets of all our traditions remind us that the moral measure of a society, in the end, is not its GDP, its military firepower, or its cultural success. Rather, it is how it treats the poorest and most vulnerable. That's the real moral test. So I close by speaking of two values: courage and hope, the two most important elements for improving the state of the world. Courage is simply to act on what you know to be right, and a willingness to sacrifice for your values, or else the values are of little use. Skills are not the deepest form of leadership. Sacrifices. Nelson Mandela has taught us that. The scriptures say, "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." Religion has no monopoly on morality, but hope is rooted in whatever we call faith. And my best paraphrase of that text is this: hope means believing in spite of the evidence, and then watching the evidence change. Mandela showed us how to do that too. We know we've lost trust in our economic and political institutions. It's sunk to dangerous levels. Pope Francis is teaching all of us leaders how you restore trust, yes, by a vision, but also by practicing a kind of humility and moral authenticity. When we return home, we will be confronted by what I call the tyranny of the urgent. The tyranny of the urgent, which often makes us forget what is morally urgent. So as we leave, I ask you not to consider just your career, but also your vocation and the vocation of your company, your institution. So I ask you now, as we close this very special week, to go to that deeper reflection the Pope called us to ask yourself, what is the one thing you will commit to right here and right now for the sake of the mission statement of the World Economic Forum to improve the state of the world?
next to you.